Good afternoon. It's Friday the 25th of February 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio, as usual for Friday, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
It's great to be with you, Mike.
And, well, where are we going to start? Where else could we start? It's going to be Ukraine.
Well, a lot's happened since your last broadcast on Wednesday.
Yeah.
It's a very fast-moving story. Things are fluid. They're literally changing. I mean, just when we put our presentation together for this program, a number of things have actually developed in the last 15 minutes,
Yes.
which we were not able to include into the program. So apologies to our viewers if it's not 100% live and up to date, but we'll do our best to give you a broader picture as possible as to what's going on and why this is important, how we got to this point, and why there's a war happening right now. So just to start off with, a lot has happened. Obviously, Russia has initiated military operations. There's a war in Ukraine. And in the last 24 hours, Mike, it's been absolutely incredible, from a military point of view. Nobody's ever seen anything like this and happening so rapidly,
right,
and so decisively. So it is pretty incredible. This is just a map here of some of the flashpoints here around the country. As you can see, Russia's military operations are not limited to any particular region, although there is a big focus in the Donbas, which is there in the lower right-hand corner. You see the two gold areas there, Donetsk and Lugansk, People's Republics, the newly declared self-proclaimed independent republics.
But recognized by Putin and Russia, and obviously Kiev on there because Russia has, in fact, moved in there this morning.
That's correct. Yeah. So we'll show you some footage as well, and we'll show you some details. But first, let's get back to here. This is the important part. There's President Vladimir Putin, and these were the stated objectives of this military operation, and they are as follows. Here, guarantee security for the people of the Donbas region. This is absolutely crucial, Mike, because that is what the Minsk Accords were meant to do. Minsk 1 and 2 were meant to guarantee the security of the people in the Donbas region, Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, because Minsk failed and was never implemented. And the Ukrainian army kept shelling civilians there for the last 7 years. This is one of the big reasons why. And they were also shelling power stations. The water supply was cut off. So for the people in that region, Russia believed that they had no choice but to intervene to provide security and to restore power, water, and food supplies, because there was also a blockade as well.
But one of the key things people have got to recognize is that, as you said, the Minsk agreement's not implemented, but the West always said Minsk agreements, as if they were implemented. We've got to adhere to the Minsk agreements.
Well, they didn't always say that. They only started saying that in the last 72 hours.
Right.
Before that, only France and Germany were really giving any mention to the Minsk agreements because they were part of the Normandy format. The UK was not involved directly in that. The US was involved, but everybody voted unanimously at the United Nations Resolution 2022. There was a unanimous UN agreement that the Minsk peace process was going to be the path towards ceasefire, towards peace in that country. And it was actively undermined at every turn by the United States and the government that it installed in Kiev from 2014 to the present.
Right.
So that's a very important point. You will not see that on any mainstream Western media. It's completely, no context on this will ever be provided.
Sure.
Because it's obviously awkward.
Right.
The truth is very awkward in this case. But back to Russia's objectives here, we'll put that back on screen. To demilitarize the Ukraine. Now, what is he talking about here, Mike? He's talking about all the weapons that have poured into the country from NATO member states, okay, including some of the Baltic states, which sent anti-tank missiles in there directly, and something they might regret possibly in the future.
Yes.
So, but all of the NATO weapons that were paid for by our public money, the billions of dollars and pounds that were spent by our governments, we'll show you what happened to those weapons in a minute. We have some footage.
Right.
It'll be very interesting. But so Russia wanted to demilitarize the situation. They basically viewed Ukraine as a de facto unofficial member of NATO because they've been arming them. Special forces have been training them from the US, from the UK, from other NATO member states. So, and also forward staging bases and operations in Ukraine. So obviously Russia viewed that as a threat, not to mention the talk of NATO membership.
Yeah.
And goading Kiev into NATO membership. This is obviously a red line. Russia put those concerns in a document to the U.S. State Department, to the other NATO member states, basically saying we need some security guarantees in terms of where we stand on international agreements, treaties, and so forth. They were rebuffed by the West. So putting all of these things together, it shouldn't come to any surprise to a lot of people to see what happened in the last 24 hours. But back to those objectives here, and here's the real one that has really got the backup of the West, the denazification of Ukraine. And everyone's saying, what Nazis? What Nazis? There's no Nazis in Ukraine. The president himself is Jewish. How could he possibly be Nazi? They're not talking about President Zelensky. They're talking about all the paramilitary neo-Nazi groups that have been backed and armed and trained by our Western military and intelligence agencies. Okay, this is well documented.
Yes.
These are the Azov Battalion and a number of these right sector affiliated. So they're ultra nationalists. They follow Stefan Bandera, who fought with Hitler during the Second World War. So
they openly wear the badges.
They do have the insignias, the Nazi symbols, and things like this. So obviously this is a concern for Russia, and because Russia made this the complaint to NATO and to the international leaders in the West, they said that Kiev does not have control over these various paramilitary units who are on the front line in the Donbas shelling civilians. So for the last few years, Zelensky and the Poroshenko and Ukraine said, we're not shelling civilians. The Ukrainian military is not shelling civilians, but these independent nationalist paramilitaries are and have been. So they've used them to deny, as a kind of form of denial, to be able to get things done without doing it through the official military hierarchy.
And where are they getting their weapons from?
From the United States.
The United Kingdom?
And from the United Kingdom.
Yes.
So we are effectively arming and training Nazis in Ukraine, and we've been doing it for a number of years. And all our politicians are saying, we don't know anything about this. So all you have to do is a few Google searches, and you can see all the documentation of this. You can see the photos. You can see them marching in the streets with the insignias. You can read their quotes. The Sun runs these articles glorifying some of these.
Daily Mail as well.
They glorify these neo-Nazi ultra-nationalist snipers, for instance, because they shot Russians and things like that. So it's in our press. I mean, so it's a bit disingenuous for our politicians to stand talking to the country and to the world, acting like they don't know anything about this. It's just kind of beyond ridiculous. So anyway, back to the objectives here, and this is also the important part that you need to pay attention to: bring human rights violators and criminals and neo-Nazis to justice. So Russia is vowing to hold a tribunal to bring these people to justice, and we'll show you they're probably not going to be apprehending them themselves. We don't think so. We think that that might actually be a point of negotiations for a possible ceasefire settlement. That remains to be seen. So looking at a strategic point of view, look at this. That's almost guaranteed right there. That's been accomplished. So check. Demilitarization of Ukraine. Their military, as we'll show you, has been pretty much, capabilities have been hobbled. They don't have control of their own airspace. Russia now has pretty much operational control of Ukrainian airspace. So the bottom two, those have yet to be realized. But in terms of these objectives, Russia has already achieved 2 out of those main 4 objectives. So just so people know, this is a map of the Ukraine. There's Lugansk and Donetsk there in the eastern part. And so this is known as the Donbas region. And what's important, look at those 2 gold sections, Mike. That's where the old line of demarcation was there on that sort of western line of those gold, where the gold parts inside of Donetsk and Lugansk. So the Ukrainian military had pushed into those territories from 2014. There was a blitzkrieg. We'll show you a timeline in a minute. So right now, Russia is basically working with the People's Republic of Donetsk and Lugansk militaries to push back to the actual provincial line you can see there in white. So that's a main objective. So to secure those 2 as independent, autonomous regions, and so that basically pushing Azov battalions and Ukrainian military out.
Yeah.
So, and this is done with air support. They're firing cruise missiles, and we'll show you again some footage. So this is really crucial. So we're going to show you a battle scenario here, thanks to the Caspian report on YouTube. Fantastic strategic channel. So this is basically a breakdown. So we're going to explain to you. So if negotiations fail, this is a quad axis operation. Russia will come in from 4 different points, and this is part of this is already being executed, Mike. And what's really important, keep your eye down lower here on the Black Sea coast and the Sea of Azov there on the right-hand side. Russia already has military bases in Crimea. So if there are skirmishes in Odessa. That's a Russian-speaking, mainly a Russian enclave, okay? So if they manage to secure Odessa or to push Ukrainian military out of Odessa, there's Sevastopol, that's where the Black Sea Fleet is based. So what you see here is the potentially formation of a land bridge. There we go, that's Moldova, there on the right-hand side, Transnistria, that's a part of Moldova, kind of an independent region there. So in terms of Ukraine and Russia, look what's developing here. Now, if they push further, they've already secured the Crimean North Canal. They've restored water to Crimea. Ukraine cut that off in 2014. Now Crimea has water as of this morning. So, and then if they move out from the Donbas and the Dnepr River and these 2 key cities here, the Dnepr River basically cuts the country in half. So potentially you can see this, how this is going to develop. You see the red areas forming? Russia could cut off Kiev from the Black Sea and isolate it and make it landlocked. Okay, that could be what happens if negotiations fail. We're jumping ahead here. So it goes a little bit more. There's another key point here. So if this happens and then they push further, Mike, which is to the Dnepr River, they're already in Kharkov, okay, and they're moving forces also around Kiev, as you mentioned. Okay, so effectively, Ukraine could find itself without control of over half of the country within a week. Okay, this is already, half of this has already been realized in terms of strategically in the last 24 hours. So this could definitely happen within a week. What does that mean for Kiev? What does that mean for NATO? It means they really don't have a leg to stand on in terms of negotiation. So, but we'll talk about Chernobyl in a minute. We'll just go back here. And that's a really important point too. So Chernobyl is right there on the banks of the Dnepr, just north of Kiev. So Russian forces would need to go around Chernobyl. It would be more convenient to go through it. Currently, Chernobyl is being held by both Ukrainian and Russian forces jointly. They have a sort of an agreement to jointly hold this right now.
Well, that's very strange because the British media seems to be yesterday was very keen to tell us that Russians have taken Chernobyl, a massive strategic, I mean, they were, I suppose, trying to encourage the idea.
Look how close it is to Kiev. So if Russia brings forces from 3 sides, then basically Kiev is surrounded.
Yeah.
At that point, that's when the real negotiations take place. That's when you see a ceasefire. This is when you see things like hand over the neo-Nazis, please. They tell Zelensky, otherwise, things are going to go from bad to worse.
Right.
So the Ukrainian military has basically been completely hobbled in this situation. So this is just a review here of what could happen. And all of what you're seeing there, Mike, could happen within a week. Okay, this is how fast things are developing. So this is a total defeat for NATO and for us, obviously, having spent billions of dollars arming and bigging up the Ukrainian military with anti-tanks. But we'll show you what happened to some of those weapons here. We've got some footage. We'll cut to that. And it's just here. So this is
right in the middle of the fighting. Matthew, tell us what you're witnessing there.
Stop. We may get.
Right, sorry.
So if we just go to put the slide up on screen here. Yeah, and then so this is an arms depot that was hit by a Russian strike. So and this is in Ukraine. There's your weapons. Okay, Those are all your weapons that we've just paid for.
Oh, so they've been destroyed?
Yes, and this is one of many warehouses that have been blown up by the Russians, hit by cruise missiles.
Money well spent then.
Good investment for the people of the U.S. and Britain. What do you think?
Excellent.
It's a good way to spend the money. You could probably build a few schools with the money that was gone. It's gone up in smoke there. And the same here. And this is, where is this? This is Gostomel here. And the same sort of thing. Those are Russian helicopters, by the way, overhead, flying in. And similar scenes in Kiev. Yesterday at lunch, Russian helicopters flying at normal speed over the capital. So now that's interesting. So we hear all this talk about the bloodthirsty Russians. So we have a clip here, which we'll show you from CNN. And it's very interesting. Listen closely to this Matthew Chance, British correspondent for CNN. Go ahead and roll this.
Right in the middle of the fighting. Matthew, tell us what you're witnessing there.
Stop. Jim, we've come out of the centre of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, and we are here at the Antonov airport, which is about 25 kilometres, 15 miles or so out of the centre. These troops you can see over here, stand up, Lewis. These troops you can see over here, they are Russian airborne forces. They have taken this airport. They've allowed us to come in and be with them as they defend the perimeter of this air base here, where helicopter-borne troops, these troops, were landed in the early hours of this morning to take and to form an air bridge to allow for more troops to come in. You can see these are Russian forces. You can tell they're Russian. I've spoken to them already. You can tell they're Russian. They've got that orange and black band to identify them as Russian forces. I've spoken to the commander on the ground there within the past few minutes, and he said they are now in control of this airport. And within the past few seconds, just before you came to us, they were engaged in a firefight, presumably with the Ukrainian military, which says it is staging a counter-offensive to try and take back this airport. We can tell you now, I'm standing outside the...
So the bloodthirsty Russians invited CNN to take close-up footage. CNN, who's basically the sworn enemy of Putin in Russia for the last 7 or 8 years.
Yes.
So that says a lot about the state of the situation there. So, and just a little bit of an update here. Russia has just captured the Black Sea Island outpost.
No, that headline's very interesting there, Patrick. I know you're going to talk about this in a second, but the British media coverage of this was that these 13 soldiers on that island shouted at the Russian military, go F yourselves, and then died as a result. But that's not quite what this article says.
No, it doesn't. Look at the subhead, Mike. It's very interesting. Ukrainian soldiers pronounced by their president as killed while defending an island were actually taken prisoner, according to Russian reports. So who knows what the truth is with this, Mike? What do you think? Do you trust the Western media?
No, because that headline that's doing the rounds right across, and it's become a hashtag on Twitter and so on, reminded me very much of the types of headlines that we saw in Syria, for example, which proved at the end of the day to be false. So I'm going to keep the British media's coverage of this incident with a very large pinch of salt until there's some verification.
We didn't have time to get it together, but if you looked at the newsstands this morning, you have an image of an older woman with a bandage and a bloody eye on every single British newspaper.
Right.
The same person. It's like straight out of central casting. No, it may be a genuine person. She may be injured. It may be a tragedy, but they're using the exact same single image to sell a war narrative across maybe 5 or 6 different major daily newspapers in Britain. So it's like, where is the plurality of reporting? Yes. And it's not there. So this is totally rapid response mechanism, streamlined narratives.
Yes.
So they all got their sort of instructions from the D-Notice committee or something this morning. Who knows? But just an update here. And this is interesting considering the comments that we'll hear from the British Prime Minister in a minute, Mike. But look at this. Ukraine ready to discuss neutrality, says Zelensky. So standing firm with NATO standing firm, and they're brave and they're fighting and pushing back those Russians. But look at this. Zelensky's tune has changed very rapidly in the last 2 days. He's now ready to discuss not being a part of NATO. Now, obviously, you want to ink that on paper. And then even then, do you think Moscow will take their word for it, even if it's written down. If a new president comes in, probably not, right? But isn't it interesting how things have developed?
It is, but of course he has an option. He could run and become a government in exile, and Britain has certainly said, well, we may be willing to host you if you were prepared to do that.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, that's interesting. So that's the what we tweeted out yesterday. Zelensky is the new Saakashvili.
Yes.
So
Yes.
is Zelensky going to be the new Mikhail Saakashvili? This is the big question. So isn't that what Saakashvili became, a carpetbagging politician after getting booted out of Georgia? By the way, Petro Poroshenko is an ex-convict now as well.
Yes.
He's being pursued for various things. He's been convicted. That's one of our presidents that we installed in there as well. It's not interesting.
Yes, but of course, this is all about. This has all come about because of the pressure that the West, in inverted commas, has put on Russia in order to protect Ukraine's burgeoning democracy.
That's right. We need to defend this democracy, and we need to make sacrifices. We need to pay more for fuel because we're doing this for democracy, to defend this this delicate, flowering democratic experiment in Ukraine. Right? Isn't that what NATO's job is to
That's certainly what we're told.
to spread democracy?
Yes.
Well, let's look at the democracy in the Ukraine here. We're calling it a basket case democracy here. Let's just take a look at a little bit of history background here. That's Yatsenyuk and Poroshenko. They were installed by the United States as prime minister and president, respectively, the interim government, after a bloody overthrow, violent overthrow of a democratically elected president, which the
Right.
West did not like because he was of the wrong orientation.
Sorry, just correct me again. So there was a democratically elected government in place. The West didn't like that, so we supported the overthrow of that democratically elected government and put these two clowns in instead.
Yeah, we did that for democracy.
Yes.
We did that for democracy. And then this was followed by the comedian who played president on television 2 years ago and decided to run for president as a joke. And lo and behold, Mike, he won by a landslide. That shows you the state of society and politics in this burgeoning democracy known as the Ukraine. Fantastic. But how bad was it? This is just scratching the surface. Let's take a look at a little bit of a timeline here. 2004, US, UK, EU, NATO backed a violent coup d'etat in Kiev. That's beyond debate. That's historical fact. However, you won't hear it on the BBC. They never mention it on the floor of the House of Commons. Everybody ignores this fact like it didn't exist.
Yeah, but that was 2014.
Ah, yes, it was 2014, yes. So that's when the coup happened in the Maidan coup. So here we go. 2014 to 2015, the Ukrainian military under Poro and company, they ran an anti-terror blitzkrieg. They called it an anti-terror operation. They dubbed the whole of the Russian-speaking population in the East as terrorists. Okay, that happened. That really happened. So they ran a blitzkrieg, and that prompted the Minsk Accords. So Minsk 1 and 2 in 2014, 2015, that was the de facto peace process, internationally recognized. But what happened after that? Well, Ukraine government stated its policy is not to ratify nor implement the Minsk Accords. They're very open about that. This wasn't a secret, but this was never mentioned. This is why the US and UK officials would never open their mouth and say Minsk in public, because this was their stated policy. This was known in the legislature in Ukraine. Everybody knew this. So obviously they're sandbagging, intentionally sandbagging the UN effectively mandated peace process.
Right.
So this is how we got to this point. It's really important to know how we got to this point this week, because you won't see any of this context or background ever mentioned by anyone in the media or in Western politics. All the experts, all the pundits, they're like buttoned on this. So let's go back and say, what else have we got to mention here? Well, this is important. The Kiev regime outlaws Russian language in certain areas and I believe nationwide actually, legalized discrimination against ethnic Russians. What a burgeoning democracy this is. And by the way, if you look at the democracy index globally, Kiev is about 85th out of 160
or so.
60 or so. So they're not very high on the league table. Let's just put it that way. Here we go, 2014 to the present. Kiev regime outlaws certain Russian opposition parties. What else? They're arresting television station journalists, editors, taking TV off the air. This is normal bill of fare for Kiev, for this lovely democracy in Ukraine. So they're not doing very well in this kind of democracy game, Mike. This is what we're beginning to realize when we look back at the timeline. And so again, 2015 to the present, Ukrainian forces shelling civilians in the Donbas, who they've deemed as being not full people in their own country, not allowed to speak their own language. This is a population of 4 million, Mike.
Yeah.
So this 4 million people have been disappeared and canceled by the Western mainstream media, by our well-informed politicians. It's as if these 4 million people have no rights, don't exist. They might as well have fallen off the edge of the earth, okay? So that's how we've got to this point. They've been completely erased. To this day, they won't even mention that there's millions of people living in there who were being targeted militarily by a country who we're arming. I mean, so do you see where Russia might have a few problems with the situation? So they felt that because Minsk collapsed, they had no choice. If Minsk wasn't going to guarantee the security of the people of the Donbas, they're saying that's genocide. So we need to step in and provide military protection for the people of this region, restore their water, their electricity, their food, allow deliveries to come in, and basically do what Minsk was meant to do. For 7 years, they could have implemented Minsk. They intentionally did not. And the US and the UK and the EU were complicit in that, because as soon as Minsk was implemented, the quid pro quo was sanctions are lifted by the EU.
And we can't have sanctions lifted against Russia.
That's right. So now Minsk is dead, a new raft of sanctions have been lopped on top. Isn't that interesting how this has played out? Again, you won't hear this analysis on the mainstream media. You won't hear it on the floor of the House of Commons or by any of the so-called experts. So here's the straw that broke the camel's back as far as Moscow is concerned. Back to the comedian. There he is, and he's talking about pursuing a nuclear weapons program for Ukraine. Now that's pretty much the last straw as far as Moscow is concerned. They basically thought, this is not a serious politician here. This is our neighbor. So again, not the brightest bulb in the box, Vladimir Zelensky. So, at that point, I think Moscow realized we're not dealing with, we can't negotiate here. He's being armed by the West. He's talking about joining NATO, and now he wants nukes. So, I mean, so you honestly, it's hard to not understand where Moscow found a lot of problems with this situation over the last 8 years. Okay, so I don't know how better to spell it out to people, but anyway, so that's where we're at.
Okay, well, so what is the UK's position on this then? Well, here we go. The UK stands with Ukraine. Everybody must be impressed with this graphic that the UK government has pushed out this morning. The UK stands with Ukraine. And so they decided to put the Ukrainian flag on top of number 10 Downing Street today. So I'm not quite sure whether that's the British government in there or not, because certainly the flag of Ukraine flying.
Well, that might not even be flying over the Ukrainian capital by tomorrow. It could be a white flag, Mike.
Well, indeed, indeed. So there we go. So let's have a look first of all at how Boris introduced his statement to the House yesterday. And we'll just run through a couple of the points that he made and have a little bit of analysis of what he was saying.
I've just come from a meeting of G7 leaders joined by Secretary General Stoltenberg of NATO. And with permission, I'll update the House on our response to President Putin's onslaught against a free and sovereign European nation. Shortly after 4 o'clock this morning, I spoke to President Zelensky of Ukraine as the first missiles struck his beautiful and innocent country and its brave people, and I assured him of the unwavering support of the United Kingdom. And I can tell the House that at this stage, Ukrainians are offering a fierce defence of their families and their country. And I know that every honourable member will share my admiration for their resolve. Earlier today, President Putin delivered another televised address and offered the absurd pretext that he sought the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. In fact, he is hurling the might of his military machine against a free and peaceful neighbour in breach of his own explicit pledge and every principle of civilized behaviour between states, spurning the best efforts of this country and our allies to avoid bloodshed. For this, Putin will stand condemned in the eyes of the world and of history. He will never be able to cleanse the blood of Ukraine from his hands. And although the UK and our allies tried every avenue for diplomacy until the final hour, I'm driven to conclude that Putin was always determined to attack his neighbour, no matter what we did. Now we see him for what he is, a blood-stained aggressor who believes in imperial conquest.
A blood-stained aggressor who believes in imperial conquest. Patrick, please explain to me where the Russian Empire is, right? Because I'm not seeing this expansionist behavior from Russia as a general rule. We have plenty of expansionist behavior from the United Kingdom and the United States and NATO. You know, dare we say Libya or Iraq or Syria,
yeah,
right, and a whole host of other regime change operations that have been run, and in Ukraine, as you mentioned already, in 2014.
yeah.
So the West, Britain, and the United States has an expansionist policy.
So arming, training jihadist, terrorist fighters in Syria by the thousands, funding them, creating parallel civil society structures, allowing them to take territory in Syria.
Expanding the EU eastwards into Poland, expanding NATO eastwards into Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia.
Not to mention Iraq.
So
Iraq.
if we're talking, what consistently is happening with the likes of Boris Johnson and other Western leaders is we constantly accuse other people of doing what we're doing ourselves, and then we tell well, anyway,
It's called gaslighting.
It certainly is.
So, you know, Ukraine is not an innocent country. Their military has been using our weapons to shell civilians for 7 years, okay, and cutting off their food, their water, and they're like, that's not innocent. And, you know, diplomacy, we've been pursuing diplomacy to the final hour. The UK never once even prodded Kiev to try to implement the Minsk Accords. They were just button-lipped on it, and the press were right there complicit with our politicians on that.
Okay, let's have a look at the next little segment here.
Now we have a clear mission. Diplomatically, politically, economically, and eventually militarily, this hideous and barbarous venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
So eventually militarily. Now that wasn't qualified in any way in his presentation yesterday. He was asked a question subsequently about, well, what did he mean by militarily, and of course he fluffed his lines and said, well, and sort of said, well, we'll be continuing to send weapons to Ukraine. But of course, he didn't actually define what he meant by militarily at all. So that is still unclear exactly what he means by that.
Oh, I think it has something to do with the tripartite alliance, the new secret,
Indeed,
not covered by the press, tripartite alliance. So you better believe British special forces are in Poland right now and probably doing supply drops every night.
Yes.
So, I mean, I would expect that would be the case.
Okay, so let's continue.
We will set up a new dedicated kleptocracy cell in the National Crime Agency to target sanctions evasion and corrupt Russian assets hidden in the UK, and that means oligarchs in London will have nowhere to hide.
So a kleptocracy cell. I mean, I nearly fell off my chair when I heard him say that. So here we're living in effectively a kleptocracy, but of course, again, we're going to accuse other people of being what we are.
It would be good if we had a department for UK politicians to police that rather than policing the Russians. So maybe they should open another branch, a domestic branch for domestic political glad handing. No, look, the bottom line is this, Mike. The bottom line, Ukraine, became a failed state when the West backed a violent coup in February of 2014 and allowed neo-Nazis to maraud through the streets and dominate some of the higher echelons of the military ranks, and then we flooded the place with weapons. Okay, so any state that's making ethnic groups that constitute a large portion of their population and ostracizing them, making their language illegal, then shelling their civilians, that's a failed state. Okay, that series of events means that you failed as a country, and it's only a matter of time before you start coming apart at the seams, or your neighbors are going to tear you apart at the seams to protect the ethnic oblasts in that country. That's exactly what we have seen happen over the last week. It doesn't take a genius or a rocket science or even someone with a PhD in international relations to work that out.
Indeed, but you know, if he's going to make sure that the kleptocrats aren't able to withdraw or evade sanctions, is he going to do anything about the money that he has received from the same kleptocrats for his own party to fund his own Conservative Party in the last number of years?
Or maybe Joe and Hunter Biden. Boy, they certainly managed to graft quite a lot of money out of Ukraine while Joe Biden was vice president of the United States. So we'll get more
on that in a minute.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay, so let's see the next little bit.
And we will work with our allies on the urgent need to protect other European countries that are not members of NATO and who could become targets of Putin's playbook of subversion and aggression. And we will resist any creeping temptation to accept what Putin is doing today as a fait accompli.
So I thought that was really interesting. So now we're not only protecting NATO countries, but we're protecting countries which are not members of NATO. And well, who put us in this role?
I think they're making it up as they go along. They're turning NATO into an elastic organization. They're stretching the remit. They're making it more arbitrary so they can go and do whatever they want without having any international treaties, agreements signed. You just basically work within the gray areas, and you make those gray areas up with rhetoric and reframing language as you go along.
Yes.
Simple.
Okay, let's continue.
Above all, the House will realize the hard and heavy truth that we now live in a continent where an expansionist power, deploying one of the world's most formidable military machines, is trying to redraw the map of Europe in blood and conquer an independent state by force of arms. And it's vital for the safety of every nation that Putin's squalid venture should ultimately fail and be seen to fail.
So we're going to, this is sort of harking back to World War II kind of language again, redrawing of the borders of Europe, and you know, and so it's all quite dangerous language in a sense.
Yeah, no, Russia's not redrawing the borders of Europe, obviously, but certainly the EU is doing a pretty darn good job of that themselves by erasing the borders of Europe. But the thing is, Mike, it is a fait accompli. Zelensky has now capitulated this morning about joining NATO. So, you know, surrender is probably going to happen. Surrender terms will be sort of drafted maybe by Monday, by sometime next week. It's all happening very rapidly.
So my question there is, has he actually capitulated, or has he sort of gone in that direction, and then later on he'll be talked to by somebody else, and will he come back in the other direction again?
Later on, the Ukrainian military is already hobbled for the next 5 years.
Right.
Okay, 11 airports, all ammunitions depots, facilities, tanks, airplanes, radar capability, anti-aircraft batteries, all wiped out in the first 48 hours. So it's going to take them years to get back to a point where they're a functioning military. And even then, they're going to have Russia breathing down their neck if they're trying to flirt with NATO again. So obviously the people of Ukraine, they're going to be looking for a scapegoat pretty soon, Mike. And then the infighting begins. And then that means Zelensky's out and somebody else comes in. Who comes in? The radicals. Could be a far right, right sector,
right.
Nationalist, Svoboda, those types. I'm sure the West would like to work with those guys because they worked with them before. That's Yatsenyuk and that whole crowd behind him back in 2014. So it'll just go from bad to worse. The more the West meddles in Ukraine, it's going to go from bad to worse for the Ukrainians.
Right.
Okay, and it's not going to hurt us. We're sitting here from a distance. People in America are beating the war drums. Oh, we need to do this to Putin, cut off European gas and oil. We need to teach Putin a lesson by basically squeezing the Europeans in their energy bills.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just insane the things that people are saying in the Western media on this. Everybody is completely clueless as to what the real facts on the ground are.
Okay, let's have a look at the last little segment here.
And to our Ukrainian friends, in this moment of agony, I say that we are with you and we are on your side. Your right to choose your own destiny is a right that the United Kingdom and our allies will always defend.
So Ukraine has the right to choose its own destiny, but Lugansk and Donetsk don't.
That's a good point, Mike. I guess the people in the Donbas don't have a right to choose their own destiny. What about the people in Crimea? They had a referendum. When was that? 2014? What was the result of that?
I think that was 98% in favor of separation from Ukraine and moving towards Russia.
Yeah, 96%. Yeah, it's a big difference there.
Yeah.
So look, so that's all self-determination, all this stuff, all this talk. It doesn't apply to anybody that wants to be self-determined if they're allied with your enemy.
Yes.
That's basically what Boris Johnson is saying there. Double standards once again. And by the way, the people in Donetsk and Lugansk are completely in abeyance with the UN Charter for self-determination.
Right.
So they defended their territory, for starters. They were being militarily shelled and targeted. They were being persecuted. They were being embargoed. And they drew borders and they organized a government. So they ticked all of the boxes and they're recognized by one of their main neighbors. So they're already qualifying for nationhood, okay? So all this talk that Russia recognizing them 2 days ago, that was Russia's in violation of international law. And then the West are stupid. They put sanctions on Russia just for recognizing these two republics. That's not against international law to recognize somebody. That's a political decision. The biggest mistake, they put sanctions on them, and guess what? When you punish someone with sanctions, this is sanctions 101 theory, by the way, you don't punish them before they do something.
Right.
Otherwise, they're going to say, well, I might as well go ahead and do it. That's why the military operation was launched yesterday morning. So, you know, you geniuses in Washington and London and the rest, you can only pat yourself on the back for this one because you did a sterling job.
Right. So Patrick said a minute ago, of course, it's not going to hurt us. So let's look and see how it's not going to hurt us, because Boris yesterday announced more sanctions against Russia. So let's put this up on screen. This is Britain's domestic resilience. And this is the update in Ukraine. So you've got a nice blue and yellow flash up in the top right-hand corner there. So the UK, according to the British government, has a strong position to withstand the global fallout from Russia's reckless actions. We have a highly diverse sources of gas supply. The UK is in no way dependent on Russian gas. So Boris yesterday in this presentation saying 3% of British gas comes from Russian sources. So we don't have to worry about that. The Europeans, on the other hand, well, they might have another problem, but we don't have to worry about it. We've got a highly resilient food supply chain. I don't think so, but anyway, that's what they claim. Our food import dependency from Eastern Europe is very low. But don't worry that you might be coming under cyber attack, because the National Cybersecurity Centre is there to support businesses and organizations to bolster their online defenses in case Russia launches a cyber attack against anybody in the West.
Oh, yes.
Is that likely? I don't think so. So let's have a look at a little bit more. Furthermore, we'll also ban Aeroflot from the UK, Boris said yesterday.
Is that a good idea?
It was not a good idea, because as a result, Russia has now closed its airspace to British Airlines. I wonder why that would have happened.
Bravo, bravo, Boris. That was another good move.
Well done. And what else was he saying? I know this House will have the greatest interest in the potential of cutting out Russia from SWIFT. And I can confirm, as I've always said, that nothing is off the table. Well, actually, it seems to be off the table, because the Europeans will not agree to this at this point in time. So SWIFT, of course, is the payment clearing service, international payment clearing service. And there have been calls for many years for Russia to be chucked out of SWIFT so that they can't clear their
Because they're Russian.
Because they're Russian. Now, what's interesting is that Boris was talking about all these massive sanctions and how Russia is going to be excluded from the international financial system and excluded from the City of London and so on. But in fact, Russia has prepared for this because last year their dollar reserves were slashed to 16% of the central banks, the Russian central bank's pile of money, compared to 49% 4 years ago, and it's also reduced holdings of U.S. Treasuries by 98% from their peak in 2010. So Russia has seen the writing on the wall with respect to sanctions and has decided to deal with that to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So they're also positioning themselves. But as I said, the EU holding back on blocking Russia from SWIFT. They don't want to do this. France and Germany, I mean, obviously Macron attempted to avoid this whole conflict over the last couple of weeks, and Germany to some degree as well.
And people don't realize the amount of business links in industry and trade between Germany and France. I mean, you go to Moscow, you see the French supermarkets, you've got the food industry. Germany, you've got Volkswagen, you've got Mercedes. So there's a lot of cross trade between Europe and Russia. So again, Britain doesn't care about that. The United States doesn't care about that. They'd rather see Europeans suffer for their foreign policy machinations and great game geopolitical ambitions than to actually, address the reality on the ground economically.
Now, of course, over the last couple of days, there have been some videos shown, and Ben Wallace occupied one of these video clips that was doing the rounds over the last couple of days.
British Defense Secretary?
British Defense Secretary. And so we'll watch the video clip, and then Patrick has a book that we're going to send Ben because we feel that he needs to see that. But let's watch the video clip first.
Whether you're based in Cyprus or we do longer tours in Kenya or Oman, or are busy, we're just making it to the brigade at the moment up in Estonia. It's going to be a busy army. And unfortunately, we've got some busy adversaries now. Gone full Tonto, I think. And that is going to require. We've got 1,000 people on standby. Any people on standby? No. I think we should send the Gurkhas. We should send the Scots Guards kick the backside of Tsar Nicholas I in 1853 in Crimea. We can always do it again.
Do it again.
So we're going to do it again. We're going to kick the backsides of the Russians as we did in the past. Because
whether you're based in Cyprus or whether you're based in Cyprus or we do longer tours in Kenya or Oman.
Right. Sorry about that. Slight technical glitch there. Right. So they're going to. Ben Wallace saying we're going to kick their backsides as we did because the Crimean War went very well for Britain, didn't it?
When was the Crimean War with Britain? When was it? 1853 or something like that?
Right.
Yeah, it was around the 1850s.
Yes.
A while ago, wasn't it?
Well, it was Victorian times anyway. But
yeah.
But so, you have a book.
Well, like we support Liz Truss and gave her, we share the geography. A basic geography with her because she was struggling with her basic geography. As Foreign Secretary, obviously, we support their further education, adult education. So we decided seeing that Secretary Wallace is an enthusiast of that era. This is from the Harry Flashman series, one of the great tomes by George MacDonald Fraser. This is Flashman, and reading the back cover, this is quite apt. When Harry Flashman's adventures as a reluctant secret agent in Afghanistan led him to join Lord Cardigan's Hussars and play a part in the disastrous retreat from Kabul, it culminates in the rascal's finest and most dishonest turn. The disastrous retreat from Kabul. Some things never go out of style, do they? The one I was looking for was the charge of the Light Brigade on the, as they called the peninsula, not Crimea, the peninsula. But so we think that the Harry Flashman series would be very instructive for Ben Wallace, especially with that gung-ho revanchist attitude.
Okay, so let's put Boris back on here because he said the government will do everything possible to safeguard our own people from the repercussions for the cost of living. Well, that's quite an interesting statement to make, and we'll hear a bit more from Ursula von der Leyen in a second, and also from President Biden. And strangely enough, the narrative seems to be very similar. But let's come back to Ben Wallace for a second. I will not trigger a European war, he said. But what I will do, this morning, by the way, what I will do is help Ukraine fight in every street with every piece of equipment we can get them. So we're going to continue to.
So I won't trigger a European war, but I will pump weapons into a
conflict zone, yes.
To exacerbate the
ramp
war?
it up, yes, absolutely,
right, okay.
yes.
Isn't that a proxy war?
Yes.
Okay.
Putin is not rational, he said. He doesn't believe the Baltic states are really countries. We have to stand up to him.
Right. Stand up to him by what? Pushing more weapons into how's that working out for the Ukraine, by the way, Mike?
I don't think it's going terribly well.
Yeah, so we're pumping weapons into the Ukraine, right? We're right behind them all the way for the last year, right? All the speeches,
right.
all that, and then what? How long did it take for their military to be completely hobbled? Less than 48 hours.
Yeah.
That's not going very well.
No. So let's see what Ursula had to say. Ursula von der Leyen, who of course is the president of the European Commission, well, she is very much on board with the sort of NATO agenda, perhaps much more so than the French or the German governments are. But anyway, let's see what Ursula had to say.
Putin is trying to subjugate a friendly European country, and he's trying to redraw the maps of Europe by force. He must and he will fail. We will hold the Kremlin accountable. The package of massive and targeted sanctions European leaders approved tonight clearly demonstrates that. It will have maximum impact on the Russian economy and the political elite. First, this package includes financial sanctions that cut Russia's access to the most important capital markets. We're now targeting 70% of the Russian banking market, but also key state-owned companies, including the field of defense. And these sanctions will increase Russia's borrowing costs, raise inflation, and gradually erode Russia's industrial base. Our export ban will hit the oil by making it impossible for Russia to upgrade its oil refineries, which gave actually Russia export revenues of 24 billion euros in 2019.
Did you notice that Ursula was sporting one of those tactical German helmets?
Yes.
In that piece.
But the key point there, what we saw there was the rapid response mechanism in action. So redrawing the maps of Europe. Didn't Boris say that, strangely enough?
We just heard that, didn't we?
And there were other phrases in there that Boris said exactly. So this is the narrative being built. But anyway, what about the Ukrainian army? Here's what they were pushing out. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry this morning, pushing this out this morning. Let's do a quite quick translation of that. Today, Ukraine needs everything. All procedures for joining the military are simplified. Carry only your passport and identification number. There are no age restrictions.
What about the whole child soldier farrago? Is that's been waived?
It seems to be. There are no age restrictions. I'm sure they would argue that that's in the older bracket.
The elderly.
But it'd be very interesting to see. Now let's have a look at NATO then, because today there is an extraordinary virtual summit of NATO heads of state and government taking place. And as you can see there, there's a doorstep of the NATO Secretary General was taking place at 14:30. Well, that's European time, by the way. That has already been cancelled. So that they've already had to change the sort of program for this. But why are they holding this meeting? It's because, Patrick, Article 4 has been invoked.
Article 4.
Article 4. Now,
not to be confused with
Article 5. Right. So Article 4 is all about if somebody feels like they're under threat. So the Prime Minister of Latvia has called for a consultation amongst NATO member states based on Article 4. So Article 4 urges NATO members to convene when another member is concerned for their territorial integrity. So basically anybody can just say, look, I'm a bit scared of that bloke over there. Would you mind holding a meeting and we can discuss it, and then we can see whether we're going to take any kind of action. So the Latvian Prime Minister concerned about that, and so that's why this this meeting is happening today. But what fascinated me, Patrick, was that over the mainstream press coverage of this and Twitter and so on was going red hot with respect to Article 4. And I saw, well, we're going to show an article a little bit later on this, but lots of people asking why it was invoked and not really very many answers coming about. But let's continue with the NATO stuff.
Well, where we're at right now, there's Jan Stoltenberg, who will be soon running the Norwegian Central Bank.
Yes.
Funny how he's got all the excitement at the tail end of his job there.
Yeah.
But so yes, this outrage will not stand, says Jan Stoltenberg. So NATO is going to, think Article 4, schedule a meeting. So NATO is stronger than ever, and they're going to schedule a meeting. And that's what you were talking about before here, Mike. This is Deutsche Welt, a German state-run media here. What's NATO's Article 5? Why are people talking about it? We're not quite sure. But you know, when you kind of delve into the sort of the fine details of it, and again, this has to be arrived at unanimously by all 30 member states. So it's a kind of a members that feel threatened, so they go to the principal, who in this case is Stoltenberg, and he gets all the faculty together, and they decide how they're going to deal with the bully on the playground here. So, but here's the key. Here's the key. Article 4 does not, however, mean that there will be any direct pressure to act. But beyond this, let's look at the text. The parties will consult together whenever, in the opinion of any of them, the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any of the parties is threatened. Political independence, that looks like that can be a little bit dicey and elastic, that concept.
Yes, well, indeed. So let's just have a quick listen to what Jens Stoltenberg had to say during the press conference yesterday, I think this was. So let's have a listen to this.
This is the new normal for our security. Peace cannot be taken for granted. Freedom and democracy are contested by authoritarian regimes, and strategic competition is on the rise. We must respond with renewed resolve and even stronger unity. North America and Europe together in NATO. We are an alliance of 30 democracies standing as one. We will protect our people and our values. Democracy will always prevail over autocracy. Freedom will always prevail over oppression.
So he has said those words, democracy will always prevail over autocracy, as we come out of 2 years of what?
Well, not everybody's out of these 2 years. In France, there's millions of people on the street in France because the president and the government said you can't work, you can't buy food unless you take an experimental pharmaceutical product. Otherwise, we're going to discriminate against you. Same in Italy, also in Germany and other countries, Austria as well.
And of course, we should mention Canada. So is NATO going to act against Canada?
I think they should intervene in Canada and take out Trudeau. But he's a NATO member, so how's that going to work? He could invoke Article 5 if he gets attacked by another NATO member.
Yes.
Then what happens? It just becomes a big barroom brawl at that point.
Right.
That would actually be quite fun to watch. Let's not hope that it happens. So democracy is the buzzword. So where did NATO get off now policing democracy? I thought it was an alliance to protect any members that got attacked by another country. I didn't realize their job is to promote democracy. When did that happen?
This is a very good question.
It's not,
about the
it's
same
not
time
written down anywhere.
No, indeed, but about the same time that NATO started talking about territorial integrity and borders. NATO considers itself to have NATO's borders. This is not a principle that's written into NATO's charter at all.
NATO's borders.
Yes.
So all sorts of problems here. This is what our forefathers called, and historical scholars called, entangling alliances. This is what led to World War I. That didn't go too well.
No.
Okay, so is entangled alliances. NATO is the epitome of an entangled alliance. It's gone way, way, way beyond its remit, and now it's causing wars. It's causing proxy wars, in countries like Ukraine. Ukraine is a proxy war. It's Russia versus NATO. NATO is using Ukraine as a proxy.
Yes.
That's exactly, they're using our weapons. They've got our back, we've got their back politically.
And our training.
Our training. So it's a proxy war, just like the other proxy wars. It's just packaged a little bit differently. So in America, they're all up in arms about defending democracy. How dare Putin trample on the delicate, flowering, fragile democracy of Ukraine?
Yeah.
And Zelensky, listen to this this highlight reel here from the U.S.
The one thing that we all agreed upon, the attack on the Ukraine by the Russians is an attack on democracy.
Putin is terrified by the prospect of a democracy at his border.
And that's why defending democracy, both at home and abroad, must be an urgent national security priority.
What is our democracy worth if we're not able and willing to stand against an invasion of another democracy?
I don't even know what to say to that.
So quite the democracy in the Ukraine, as we showed you in the previous segment here. So, you know, beyond this, on from this point of view here. So Pelosi basically lost it, okay, when she was in her press conference, and she basically, the vitriol against Vladimir Putin in Russia, they don't know what to do because they can't really do anything but sort of levy some sanctions here and there and some rhetoric from their pulpits and so forth. So here's Pelosi again. Just you have to marvel at the venom here. But go ahead and roll this.
This is a very evil move on the part of Vladimir Putin. He's a KGB guy who happens to be probably the richest man in the world because of his exploitation of his own people that he doesn't want them to know about. This, my friends, is our moment. This is the Sudetenland. That's what people were saying there.
The Sudetenland.
The Sudetenland. So
Right.
she's invoking Hitler in World War II.
Yeah.
She said Putin's the richest man in the world. I didn't know that. He's not on any of the rich lists.
But he is pretty wealthy.
Is he wealthy?
Yeah.
How do we know that?
Well, that's
By the investigative work of Luke Harding, I guess.
Exactly.
Who knows? But anyway, so she's totally lost it. Everyone's screaming Hitler all over the place. So, I mean, this is just par for the course for the Democrats. So where does that leave Joe? This is the big question. Where does that leave Joe? We bring Joe up on screen here?
Yeah.
Oh, another one. There we are. Joe Biden. So where's Joe in all this? This is the question. Well, Joe's taking the bull by the horns, I will have you know. And so basically it's wake me when it's over. And so what's Joe going to do? Well, he's going to send a strong message to the Russians. How strong? Well, look at this. Joe Biden has ordered 7,000 more troops to Europe. He is not messing around. Where do you think he's sending those troops, Mike?
Oh.
Let's have a look here. He's an armored brigade of the combat team to. He's going to show. He's going to.
It must be Poland at least.
Well, not quite, Mike. It's not that far east. He's going to be sending them to Germany. 7,000 more troops to Germany to rotate to fill in the other 7,000 that left over the summer, probably.
Yes.
So big, strong statement here by Biden. And this is going to reassure our NATO allies. So just know that Biden is not messing around here.
Good.
He absolutely means he's going to stand toe-to-toe with Vladimir Putin. So Putin should take note. So here's Biden. So Biden's thing now is, and Kamala Harris is saying, we need to basically suck it up for democracy. We're going to suffer. We're going to pay more at the pump. Hyperinflation, goods and services, food, it's all going to go up. But you're doing it for the people of Ukraine. We got a video here. Watch this.
I know this is hard and that Americans are already hurting. I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. But this aggression cannot go unanswered. If it did, the consequences for America would be much worse. America stands up to bullies. We stand up for freedom. This is who we are.
The president has already said Americans will be facing some economic fallout or some hardships. Can you explain to Americans what exactly will they face if this happens?
Sure. As the president talked about in his speech, we are aware that, again, when America stands for her principles, and all of the things that we hold dear. It requires sometimes for us to put ourselves out there in a way that maybe we will incur some cost. And in this situation, that may relate to energy costs, for example.
That's a pretty good mask.
Oh, so why is the vice president hiding behind a mask? Is the pandemic still on? I don't know. So basically they're saying you be prepared to pay. So everything they've done to deflate or to inflate the currency, to cause hyperinflation, all the COVID relief, all the dumping of billions of dollars and wasting it on test and trace, buying vaccines that all got dumped in a landfill or sent away to some African country that we don't care about. Okay, all of this stuff, furlough, and the list goes on, all the corporate welfare, all of that. And then jacking up the price of energy to pay for all these green policies. All of that has now been funneled into one very convenient scapegoat, and that is
Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin. So job done, guys. Everything, all sins are absolved, and now everything's on Putin. That's how it works.
Yeah.
So anyway, so here's Katie Pavlich. She's a very good analyst. She actually exposed the Fast and Furious scandal, one of the first good authors to do that during the Obama administration. She's also a commentator on US mainstream media. Listen to what she says here about the price of gas, but also about Joe Biden and corruption in Ukraine. Listen to this.
Also keep trying to make this argument that everything that, with the energy situation, that they're doing everything that they can to mitigate the cost for Americans and the pain at the pump. It's just not true. If they wanted to mitigate the cost, they would turn the Keystone Pipeline back on. They would hire back all the guys they fired on day one, and they would get 800,000 barrels of oil a day running through that pipeline instead of importing 500,000 barrels a day from Russia. The other thing I want to bring up here is the Ukraine-NATO situation. So for years, Ukraine has asked to be in NATO. They've said, we want to pay our fair share. We want to be part of the alliance. We want to have this Article 5 situation against Russia, just in case they decide to invade like they are right now. Instead of, Ukraine was always told, well, you guys have to fix your corruption issues first. Joe Biden told them you have to fix your corruption issues first. And instead of actually helping them fix the corruption issue, the Bidens and other politicians in Europe and the United States participated in it. They got rich off of it. And now Ukraine, civilians there, are going to die as a result of this chaotic situation where they were taking advantage of the lawlessness, the corruption in Ukraine, not fixing it. They let Ukraine hang out there so they could all get rich. And now they're screwed. They're surrounded.
Really
and so I think
point.
people need to remember that. They've been asking to be part of the alliance.
Yeah.
They've been told, nope. While people like President Biden have gotten rich off of it, Hunter Biden got rich off of it, and now they're in a position where they're
in countries like.
Okay.
That's fact. That happened. Why isn't anybody talking about that? Joe Biden basically held a gun, proverbially, to the Ukrainian government saying, if you don't fire the prosecutor that's investigating my son, we're going to withdraw over $1 billion in financial aid to your government. And Joe admitted and boasted that he got the prosecutor fired. Hunter Biden was creaming in $1 million a year for sit on the board of a gas company while his father was vice president in charge of the Ukraine portfolio. I mean, come on. Come on, man.
Corruption,
as Biden would say.
So the question is, what has the effect on oil prices been? Well, here's Reuters, and they say oil prices surge as Russian invasion of Ukraine rings supply alarm bells. So that was this morning, but I was a bit confused about that because when we looked at the actual Brent crude prices, well, let's look at UK oil first. Well, they're not really surging at the moment. So
doesn't look like it's surging. It should be going the other direction, right?
So, there was a surge right at the very beginning of the day, but it very quickly flattened off and was heading back down to the previous levels. And if we look at US oil, well, that was about the same. And what was interesting as well was that if we look at whether people are taking long or short positions, so whether they're expecting the price to go up or go down, it's about a 50-50 split. So there's no particular agreement in the markets that anything's going to be happening with respect to supply and demand and so on. And then if we look at natural gas, well, that's obviously from March until the present, March last year, that is, until the present. So that's about a year's worth. Well, obviously there was that spike in September. The levels haven't really improved very much since September, but nothing massive going on there either. So where does that take us?
Well, all our politicians are saying we need to get off our dependency on Russian gas. Well, here's just a cursory breakdown here. European Union, according to these estimates here, the statistic, 30% of its gas from Russia. This is via a couple of different pipelines that are feeding into Europe. Their biggest chunk of that, of course, there is Germany at 40%. So Germany's getting 40% of its gas from Russia. Italy's getting 20. France is getting 18. Now, Poland's not on there, but Poland's interesting because they declare they're getting less, but actually they're getting more. And we don't have time to go into the details of that. But here's the pipeline. So look at this picture anyway, Mike. That's not easy to undo. Natural gas isn't something you can just put LNG bottles on a boat from America that you fracked and then ship it over to Europe, and all of a sudden the supply is going to be uninterrupted. That's just fantasy thinking. But yet fantasy thinking is what our politicians generally specialize. They're very good at fantasy thinking.
And can I just mention before you move on to that, of course, Boris said that the UK is only receiving 3% of its gas supplies from Russia. But the Netherlands there, I'm not sure what it's getting, but a significant amount of gas from Russia. But we're importing electricity from the Netherlands, which of course is mostly generated by gas these days.
That's right.
The same with the French interconnects as well. There's going to be some gas involvement in that. So it's not quite as clear a picture as Boris is implying.
The other thing he's not mentioning is that we're paying more for our gas because we cut our Russian supply.
Right.
So obviously, if everybody knew how that game worked in the UK, they'd probably be opposing the policies of the government.
Right.
Because it's hurting people in their wallets and at the end of the month. For what? For what reason? For what? To prop up a puppet in Kiev? Some could say that's not a good argument, basically. So, but here's what the pipelines look like. So they say they've canceled Nord Stream 2. They're doing a victory lap right now in Washington and London, saying we killed Nord Stream 2. That's the joint venture there. You can see from Russia there by Finland and directly into the port in, I think it was Rostock or something like that in Germany. So that's Nord Stream. But they don't say Nord Stream 1 is operational. Then you've got the Yamal pipeline that goes right through Poland. Poland takes off of that, by the way. That might not be counted in their gas, I'm not sure. Directly into Europe, and then over to other parts of the EU. So, and then you also have South Stream pipelines projects from the Black Sea to Turkey, through Bulgaria, and so forth. So there's a number of different routes there. So, and through the Ukraine. So the reason they're pursuing Nord Stream, there's two reasons. One is the Ukrainian situation is unstable for Russia. So they obviously want to bypass that situation. And also Germany needs more energy. Why? Because of Germany's green policies. Because natural gas is an important component of the green policies of Germany. They've shut down their coal plants. They've shut down their nuclear plants. They rely on natural gas to provide the baseload for their power, to heat their homes, etc. So you can't just switch it off. If they do, the Greens and the woke brigade are going to have to accept the fact that coal's coming back.
Yes.
Coal's coming back, and so is nuclear. And I know Boris has gone a bit woke recently as well. So his dreams of a green utopia, that can't stand unless you have a stable and affordable supply of energy into Europe and the UK.
Yeah.
And wind farms ain't going to cut it. And not solar farms aren't going to cut it either. So it's all great rhetoric at COP26, but the reality is our politicians are making us pay well over the odds for energy when we shouldn't be. And why? For geopolitical and political reasons.
Yes. Okay. So at this point, I would normally say if you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, then head over to ukcolumn.org/community. But I can't say that today. Because this afternoon we will be switching off the community website, the old community website, and we'll be doing a fairly major upgrade to our community platform. So you won't be able to join us over this weekend, and we'll give you more details of where to go if you'd like to support us on Monday. But if you do want to support us by sharing our material, of course, you can find us on the various platforms here. Now, I just want to mention this because Patrick has gave a very good timeline at the beginning of the program about how we got into this situation. But I wanted to just remind everybody about what Britain's position is with respect to prosecuting wars and warfare and defense in inverted commas. And we're going to start off just by mentioning this gentleman, Mark Cotton-Smith, because of course, as great as he looks there, he stood up at RUSI one day a couple of years ago, if you remember, Patrick, talking about the fact that Britain is effectively in perpetual war now, that the ideas of war and peace being binary states are no longer applicable, that we're effectively on a spectrum. Well, he is the Chief of the General Staff at the moment, but in a few months' time, in June, he will no longer be Chief of the General Staff. It will be this gentleman, General Sir Patrick Sanders. Now, he's currently Commander Strategic Command, and in March 2021, he was saying this: Russia has combined military and non-military means to alter the map. So this rhetoric about redrawing the borders was already in place a year ago, attempting to change the balance of power and undermining the cohesion of our societies through disinformation. Well, here he is, a more recent picture of him, but in fact, possibly about the same time anyway, but this is him speaking also at RUSI, saying that Strategic Command will transition the industrial age joint force to the information age's integrated force, and that he was launching the whole integrated operating concept, which is the basis of Britain's, in inverted commas, defense, but I would argue Britain's war drive, because as they said when he was launching this, the integrated operating concept, the central idea of it is offensive rather than defensive. So if Britain is talking about NATO being a defensive institution, if Britain is talking about itself as being a defensive nation, well, no, that changed when this became the central core of Britain's Ministry of Defence policy. So let's look and remind everybody a little bit more of what this meant. The central idea of the integrated operating concept is to drive the conditions and tempo of strategic activity rather than responding to the actions of others from a static home-based posture of contingent response. What does that mean? It means we're going to create the situations for strategic activity. What does strategic activity mean? War?
Yeah, it means we're going to cause problems and create situations that we can then react to.
Exactly. They went on to say the old distinction between foreign and domestic defense is increasingly irrelevant. When fake news appears to originate not abroad but at home, it gains credibility and reach, stoking confusion, disagreement, division, and doubt in our societies. Now, of course, the key pusher of fake news, according to the Ministry of Defense and the Foreign Office, is Russia. The Foreign Office has its anti-disinformation unit, which is there to counter Russian disinformation. But there's an acknowledgement within the integrated operating concept that applies at home as well. So
they're saying that the domestic population is the enemy.
They are absolutely saying that. In fact, they reinforce it with this: home is no longer a secure sanctuary where we may choose to launch interventions unhindered. Away is no longer a regional horizon, but a global one involving space and the electromagnetic spectrum. So the point here is, Patrick, as you say, this idea of perpetual war doesn't mean perpetual war in other countries. It also means perpetual war at home. And so if anybody thinks that this situation in Ukraine doesn't apply to us here, well, it absolutely does, at least in the minds of the Ministry of Defence and the British military. So we've got to take that into account.
And they always say that the talking point you see constantly, Mike, is that the fake news or misinformation sows doubt in our society and democracy. No, the news that they're worried about is the ones that sows doubt in the credibility of government and the mainstream corporate media and state media apparatuses like the BBC. And guess what? The mainstream media and government are doing a perfectly good job of undermining their own credibility by their words and deeds, and they have been for a long time. That's nothing new. These people are repackaging this to say that this is some kind of a endemic threat and we need to do something about this. So we need to deploy new assets and create a whole new class of defense.
Right. So it went on to talk about the threat and that the threat had evolved, that adversaries don't recognize the rule of law. Well,
adversaries.
Yes. So was Russia recognizing the rule of international law when it recognized the two independent republics of the Donbas?
100%. Ask any international law scholar. I'm sure you'll find a few that have a different opinion depending on where their politics might lie. But in terms of the letter of the UN Charter, Yes, 100%.
Yes. So on it goes on. Pervasive information and new technologies enable new tools and techniques to undermine our cohesion. So they're implying that they're being undermined in some way. And adversaries have studied the Western way of war and modernized their capabilities accordingly. But anyway, the key point here is, with respect to the integrated operating concept, that this is an offensive policy, not a defensive policy. And this is, in my opinion, Patrick, and you may have a different view, but this seems to me that it has come along in parallel with NATO declaring that it's got borders of its own. And so there's been a shift in the attitudes, or the shift in the outlook of Western democracies as to what defense actually means.
So they're reframing the situation, they're reframing reality in order to give them more license to do more activity outside of the rule of law.
Yes.
Is that correct? It's probably, so, I mean, this is, it's going to maintain a domestic sense of fear, which we commented on, and that helps to propagate the military industrial machine and the new sort of cyber machine they're building. But there's a lack of viable target nations at the moment, okay? So you need to create the perception that the military industrial complex, the intelligence complex, that's useful, because the external enemies aren't really threatening you. Your biggest threat is your own mismanagement of your financial system and your decrepit politics and your totally corrupt mainstream media. Those are the biggest threats to democracy right now in the West. I think our viewers will probably agree with that. But they're unwilling to fight an actual enemy militarily. I mean, Ben Wallace was saying we're going to kick the behinds or the backsides of the Russians. So Russia has what, 32,000 military personnel and administrative personnel, in total around 30,000 in Crimea. So he's going to send the Gurkhas into Crimea.
Yeah.
And that'll be half the British armed forces that you need to. So I mean, they're just. Peter Ford on the broadcast yesterday on TNT said it's infantile thinking.
Yes.
Infantile language that's being used by ministers. Former UK ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford. I mean, I can't argue with that. So.
No. Okay. Well, let's end this segment on Russia Today, and Keir Starmer calling for the propaganda network TV channel to be banned in the UK. Which one are we talking about? Well, of course, RT. Now, you've put a couple of RT articles on today, Patrick. So that would be banned because there would be no opportunity to put those on screen.
Well, if you banned RT, you'd basically be shutting off a big source of information. I mean, if there's a war on and you're banning RT, you're going to be missing a lot of important information because, hey, the Western media isn't totally biased in their reporting. I mean, this isn't anything anybody doesn't know. Well, we realize this. So if you take away a source of information, be it from Iran or be it from Russia, so that's not the problem isn't misinformation. I mean, this is a buzzword that politicians have latched onto. That misinformation, disinformation, and the new one, malinformation. Okay, so there's three of them.
Right.
So it's MMD or something like. They'll come up with an acronym for it. They can't define what the difference between any of these is. They're just using these tropes. Okay. Stalin himself invented the term disinformation to rubbish his political opponents. So ironic or not that our politicians are using Stalinist terms, but the point is they want one single narrative. They cannot handle having any other narrative out there that will compete with the narrative that they're trying to fashion, whether that's the rapid response narrative between Ursula, Boris, and Biden, or any other version of any story, especially vis-a-vis Russia, okay? That's what they're afraid of. This is the problem. It's not Russian propaganda, because let's be honest, if you want to talk propaganda, I think the BBC is in a special league, a super league of its own. And so is CNN, NBC, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, the Times of London, the Guardian, and the list goes on.
Yes. Well, look, the question, we're just going to finish off with this. The question always is, when all this kind of stuff is going on, what else is going on at the same time? Because, of course, lots of things slip under the radar. But I just wanted to include this topic. Here is the HSJ. Now, this is the, excuse me, the Health Service Journal, which, of course, is the news and insight service for all healthcare leaders working in or with the NHS, as well as news and insight. They say of themselves they provide expert commentary and analysis on the UK healthcare sector and are the only organisation that covers all aspects of publicly funded healthcare, from health policy to acute and primary care, specialist services to mental health, and commissioning to provision. So that's really good. So they were holding their HSJ Digital Transformation Summit yesterday. And in fact, it finishes today. Well, who was speaking at it but the wonderful Sajid Javid. So let's bring him on screen. Well, if anybody thought that the NHS app was going away or any of this stuff, get a load of this. He wants to accelerate the rollout of electronic patient records with a new approach so we hit 90% coverage by the end of next year, because digitization is key. But here you go. To get there, we need to show people that the NHS app is for life, not just for COVID, and that it will be a future front door for interacting with the NHS. So forget about ever speaking to a GP. Forget about any of that stuff. You will have to do everything from the NHS app. And of course, you know, your medical status, whether you're able to go to get a job or take part in a public event or whatever, that will be sitting there quite happily on the NHS app. NHS data is making the world safer and healthier thanks to the country's single national health service. The NHS is a precious source in the form of data that can offer so much insight to pioneers in the life sciences, including some of the world's largest genomic data sets.
Life sciences, do you know what that means?
Well, this is the new industry, Patrick.
No, life science is a euphemism for the pharmaceutical industry. This is what the pharma industry refers to themselves as, the life sciences. Yes. It's completely ridiculous. And to say that with a straight face is it shows you what a corporate spokesperson this particular minister is.
Yes, so speaking of genomics, let's have a look at this in Science. A unified genealogy of modern and ancient genomes is the title of the paper. Well, this is really spectacular because this is developed at the University of Oxford, and it involves a new genealogical network. Let's have a look at the picture of it, the picture that they put in the preview of this paper. So they have apparently combined thousands of modern and ancient genomes from data sets. This has allowed them to construct the largest human genealogy database to date. And so they've said, we've basically built a huge family tree, a genealogy for all of humanity that models as exactly as we can the history that generated all genetic variation that we find in humans today. This genealogy allows us to see how every person's genetic sequence relates to every other, along with all the points of the genome. While humans are the focus of this study, the method is valid for most living things from orangutans to bacteria. It could be particularly beneficial in medical genetics in separating out true associations between genetic regions and diseases from spurious connections arising from our shared ancestral history. Essentially, we're reconstructing the genomes of our ancestors and using them to form a vast network of relationships. We can then estimate when and where these ancestors lived. The power of our approach is that it makes very few assumptions about the underlying data and can also include both modern and ancient DNA samples. But this is all about the development of the life sciences industry and providing data sets for the life sciences industry. And I think that there are major dangers in this. But anyway, the point is that what they're describing of the life sciences industry, what Sajid Javid is talking about with respect to life sciences, is he's mainly talking about the genomics industry and where this whole thing is going. This is the growth industry that has just magicked itself right out of the COVID-19 situation.
Life sciences, biotech, big pharma. When you see life sciences, when they say that, it's biotech and big pharma. Just understand that point. But yeah, the genomic business is a massive gravy train. This is a giant global multi-billion-dollar canard of an industry, and it's being driven by things like PCR testing and all these different tests that they've come out. COVID was just the warm-up act, ladies and gentlemen. They've got tests for just about everything. They're dying to roll out and run through your NHS app or whatever app, okay? They'll even tell you if you're listening to your headphones or looking at your screen too long, or you haven't taken enough steps this week to qualify for your social credit. It's just a dystopian nightmare, but this is exactly what they are planning down the pipeline.
It is indeed. Okay, well, look, we've got to leave it there for now. Thank you very much for joining us today, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday, and for our members on the new community website and new chat box, and we will see you then. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.